Hello, this is Robert Rickover at Body Learning, and today my guest is Monica Gross, who is an Alexander Technique teacher in Asheville, North Carolina. She's been a certified teacher for almost 30 years. She has a background in dance, and she has also served on the faculty of the Haynes School of Music at Appalachian State University. And she also does some Alexander Technique teaching using Skype, which is going to be the topic of this will be the topic of our program today. Monica, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Robert. It's nice to speak with you.
Well, it's good talking to you as well. Could you begin by just giving our listeners a very short description of the Alexander Technique?
Oh, sure. I do think it's very profound. The Alexander Technique is really a very teachable and practical method to use conscious awareness that you have to improve and maintain and restore as an adult the natural poise and freedom that you had as a child, and bring that sort of childlike satisfaction more into your daily life.
Okay, I like that definition. Now, typically, in the past at least, the Alexander has been taught on an in-person sort of basis, a teacher and a student, or a teacher and a group of students all in the same room. And part of that teaching has involved the teacher using his or her hands to supplement his or her verbal instructions to help guide students a bit with their hands. Now, obviously, when you're using Skype, that hands-on component is no longer there. Could you say a bit about how that works out in practice? What's lost, and perhaps even more importantly, what's gained by using a medium like Skype to teach the technique?
Well, with the Skype teaching that I've been experimenting with, and I do consider it an experiment, I decided to experiment with it because of the huge growth of technology use over the last 10 years in particular, particularly with young people. And I was finding that people were spending so much time on Facebook and email and texting and video games that they weren't finding they had enough time to come in and have a lesson. That was the feeling I was getting. And I don't think that is correct. I think that they do have time, but their perception is that they don't. So I wanted to find a means, in a way, sort of stare the beast in the face, and find a means whereby that I could interact with people in a way that didn't increase their stress management. In other words, that they didn't have to navigate finding the time and making the schedule to come and travel and that. That was one aspect.
And getting a babysitter if need be,
Correct.
That kind of stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. Because I think we all know, particularly since the downturn in the economy here in America, obviously, and even globally, people have less financial resources and less time, or less perception of both. And so the other aspect is, of course, students who are in places where there are no Alexander Technique teachers.
Yes.
So those were the two reasons I became interested in this. I guess a third reason was that people spend so much time in offices in front of computers, more than 9 to 5 now. We know that nobody works 9 to 5 anymore. They're all working, huge times, not only in the office but at home. They bring the work home. Wouldn't it be interesting to devise an intervention through Alexander Technique via Skype or FaceTime or any other live stream intervention that makes them alert while they're dealing with this device?
That's a fascinating explanation. It's completely different from my own, which was all these people out in the middle of central Nebraska and just and now all sorts of places where there are no teachers and take hours or half a day to
Yes.
get to a teacher. But I had
Right.
never thought of that other one that you brought up, which does make a lot of sense to me. That's an eye opener for me.
It's a little bit different way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
So rather than saying I'm giving up um, the beautiful skill of touch
Hmm.
as teaching,
Hmm.
I'm not giving that up.
Hmm.
I'm saying you to a student, why deny yourself that if you can have it? Maybe I can give you a little bit of AT principles via Skype so that if you are within distance to come for a lesson, you will,
Hmm. Hmm.
because you'll find the time to do it because you've learned inhibition,
Right. Right.
okay? As
So
opposed to them just writing Alexander technique off.
now, when you are using Skype to work, and as you say, you're experimenting, and I think that's the case of pretty much all the Alexander teachers I know who are using Skype right now. We're talking in early 2014. We're all experimenting with it. I've changed the way I've been using Skype a lot over the last few months, even.
Oh,
But
I'd be really interested in hearing.
yeah, I mean it's an evolving medium, but what how, how do you see the loss of hands, as it were?
Hmm.
How do you see that affecting the teaching process?
Well, I think one of the positives, the pros, I will say, about this sort of teaching is the person the student has a sense of your presence. They feel a connection to you. They're with you in the same way that if you're talking to your daughter via Skype who's in college, there's more of a connection than if you're on the phone or if you write a letter perhaps. There's a sense of the presence of the person that's in real time, although Skype can, as you know, be notorious for dropping out and delays and things like that.
Right, right.
But in that, you are still creating a bond with your student of caring and compassion and attention. You're giving your full attention to that student during that time. And that's something that most people don't have access to a lot of the time. And that's one of the reasons they relish an Alexander lesson.
Hmm.
Now, I can't reach through the computer or the device and touch the person, but I can allow them to begin to understand immediately that what they are learning is something that they already have, that they're not aware of, or that they've lost an awareness of. It is
Hmm.
not something that I'm doing to them, or fixing them, or adjusting them, or manipulating them, which are all things that we don't do as teachers, but which the student has a perception in the early lessons that we are doing.
Hmm.
I think we'd
Yes.
all agree that that's something we really have to start. That's a big part of the early lessons, is to let them know, no, this is just you learning about these reflexes that you have, the proprioception, the self-perception, the kinesthetic awareness, all of those factors.
And how you can direct yourself to bring about useful changes
Correct. How
on
you can.
your own without anyone even being in the room with you. I mean, when I'm teaching that to new students, I'll say, "Well, you notice I just talked you through something. I didn't have my hands anywhere near you, and you made a change." I guess with Skype, you almost don't have to say that.
That's the point.
Yeah,
I
you don't
think the
have to say that.
beautiful, you don't have to say that. It is innate within the pedagogy of what you're doing. And in a way, I have made quicker progress with some of my Skype students
Hmm.
in that area of losing a dependency or a
Hmm.
perceived dependency on me as the teacher, the sort of magic hands, come and fit, I need your hands, I need this. Um, it's not keeping the student at arm's length. It's just as warm and connected. It's just saying, encouraging them. I have a daughter who's 9. When she was beginning to walk, I encouraged her to walk, but I didn't do it for her and I didn't hold her, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, I'm trying to recreate that process and that enjoyment and that self-exploration that you have as a child when you're pre-verbal, learning how to move, learning how to pick something up, learning how to walk, where your sense of yourself in space and time, your intention, your desire to go to the mother, for instance, and your success at doing that are all integrated. There's no sense of separation between those things. So for the student via Skype, as they shift and change, as you said, you talk them through it, and you go, yes, that's it. There, what did you notice? And they'll say, how did you see that? How did you know?
Mm-hmm.
And
mm-hmm.
we know how we know. We can see it.
Mm-hmm.
It's visible.
Right.
As it is visible in a lesson when someone's in the room with you. So the satisfaction a student has at the end of these lessons is profound.
Yeah, that kind of mirrors my own experience using Skype. There is something very clean about it. And because it is absolutely clear what you're doing, you're teaching. And the other thing is that because of that, I found that people I work with on Skype are much more likely to continue experimenting on their own between sessions.
Yes.
Much more. They'll come back, the next week or the next few days, and they'll say, well, I was trying using those directions in this situation, and I found modifying them in a certain way made them better. They will experiment, whereas most, not all, but most of my in-person students, it takes a while to get them to really
bridge
get
that
I am not going to fix them.
Well, this is, I have a theory about that.
They need to fix themselves, yeah.
I have a theory about that with the Skype. When you're doing, which comes back to one of those first things I said about why I was interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
When you're giving a Skype lesson, it's usually in the person's home, or secondarily perhaps in their office.
In their office, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Although occasionally I've done Skype lessons when someone's on a golf course or, at a track if they have a smartphone.
Sure, yeah.
I check in with them.
Yeah.
So when you're having a lesson in your habitual environment, I think it becomes marked with the experience, the perceptual experience of the changes you had during your lesson. So being in your space becomes a kind of mnemonic device that wakes you up again. Oh, when I was in the kitchen and reached up to this cupboard last week, I had this different experience of myself. In the same way that a student, what you were saying, that bridging that gap between the lesson and bringing it into their daily life, the student will come back and say, yes, I was getting in and out of a chair and I remembered because you had a chair lesson. Yeah. Or they'll say, I was walking, down the corridor between the fax room and the coffee room and I remembered because you had a walking lesson.
Mm-hmm. In that same environment.
Well, no, I meant when you have a hands-on lesson where they come to your studio.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And the times that they do remember to use the directions and what they've learned is usually when it's an activity that you've explored in a lesson.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, absolutely.
But if you add in the factor of environment, where they're learning and sitting in their office working on their email as when they had their lesson, they start to associate the experience of a change of use with doing email.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, you can do things with Skype that would be fairly tricky without it. You can actually work with someone as they are processing email. You might say, okay, answer do a few emails and just
Absolutely.
do them, and then we'll talk about what happened during that. Or you can play with that with Skype.
I've had a great lesson where it was someone in their office and it was let's do a 20-minute lesson while you're at
Hmm.
work,
Hmm.
because that's all you can spare, right?
Right.
And I said, okay, I'm not going to let you do your email for 2 minutes, but you're going to look at it.
Yeah, right, right, right.
Now, what are you observing?
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
the
right. And
level of
you could even get them to do a little email.
Now you can do that in a hands-on lesson,
You
but when they're
can,
in their
you can.
office,
Yeah, it's really
it really
easy.
imprints.
Yeah, yeah.
The plasticity of the brain is imprinting the experience within their work environment or within their home environment.
Exactly, exactly. And the other thing I want to get to potential downsides of this in a moment, but I'd like to add that I began distance learning before Skype. I was doing a bit using the phone, primarily with people who were already coming for the occasional lesson, and I was amazed at how much you could do without the visual, even.
Oh, using just telephone.
Just using a phone,
Yeah,
I would have
sure.
them. I would have them have a hands-free set and so on. And when Skype videos became practical, that was like a whole new world for me in terms of distance teaching. It made it just
Yeah.
I just saw nothing but good in that. But having said all that we've said, what well, I guess I would phrase the question, who do you think, in terms of students, it might not be a good idea to use Skype for?
You know, I might have some reservations for someone who has a really bad injury, because I'd want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think, should they really need hands-on support. Um, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't want to help someone but I would really have to define what we were going to be doing in the lesson,
Mm-hmm.
both so that they wouldn't be worried and
Mm-hmm.
anxious,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously so that the expectation would be simple and straightforward. Pretty much maybe working with inhibition or teaching them how to do some lying down or maybe helping them change positions with more ease.
Mm-hmm.
But you kind of don't want to be in the position where somebody is going to really have a hard time and you're not there to be with them.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
I think that would be one very serious consideration.
Mm-hmm. And any
Um,
others?
I think someone who might have, obviously some learning disabilities or hyperactivity or things like that as an adult,
Mm-hmm.
they might really need you in the room so they could stay with that you really keep them, use everything you have, because sometimes you have to use every skill you have to keep that person um, directing and moving and flowing. Um, and obviously with children, you'd want another, if you're going to do Skype, you'd want to have a parent there as well. Because first of all, any teaching that I do with children, I really like to work with the parents as well, because the children tend to be very close to good use already, if not perfect use, and the parent needs to understand how to preserve that for them. So
Yeah,
those are some of the
I
areas.
think having a parent is in the room is really important, and also because a lot of times it's the parent's own misuse pattern that you're dealing with the kid
That's
ultimately.
basically all you're dealing with, I
Yeah,
think, Robert, aren't we?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So the idea of the family workshops that I'm developing, which is a different discussion, but
right.
it's imperative that teachers and parents are in the room as ostensibly the child is getting the lesson, right? That's
Hmm.
that's kind of what they're perceiving is happening, but really they're getting the lesson so that they can
Exactly.
preserve the child's use.
Exactly. And I think a category that I haven't hasn't come up yet, but someone who's recently suffered a really serious injury and is in such shock and trauma that they can't really able to
Yeah.
mobilize their thinking all that much. And since that's going to be an important part of a Skype lesson, I would
I'd
be
be hesitant
hesitant,
then.
very,
Yeah, yeah.
very hesitant too.
Also, someone who may have had a serious trauma, an accident, or a sexual abuse, or anything like that, that might really need you there. Now, I think people, if it's been a long time since that trauma, I'm comfortable with working with someone, because even if they do have tears and emotion, you can be there with them during that. If it's something very new that has never come to them before, it might be something you'd want to be a hands-on lesson with.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I think these are kind of no-brainers. I think this is what any thinking teacher would assess before setting up a
Right,
Skype session.
absolutely. And just almost an aside, there are some students who are um, for whom touch
Yes,
is
I was going to say that.
very iffy. I
Yeah,
mean, who
very,
any kind of touch, and Skype, of course, takes care of that very nicely.
very neatly. I
Um,
have students exactly like that, and
so,
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one of the pros of Skype, is that there are some, particularly some young people, who do not want to be touched, and or find
mhm,
it very difficult, and that is a perfect kind of playful lesson that you can have via Skype, where that's not a concern for them or a
yeah,
worry.
exactly.
They're sort of autodidactic that way.
Now, we've planned at least one or two other interviews about Skype covering some different aspects of it, but I'm thinking that maybe for this initial one, unless you have something you'd like to add, this might be a good place to bring it to an end. Or unless is there something you especially want to say that we haven't covered on this topic?
Well, I think my takeaway, because I always ask my students, what's your takeaway from this lesson? I think my takeaway from our conversation is that this is a place of experimentation. Um, I think if FM was alive now,
I was just going to say he'd
he
be
would
on
be so
Skype.
into this.
Oh, I know he'd be on Skype. I know that, for example, he
His
actually
Google ads would be everywhere.
he'd be on Facebook. Yeah, I mean, FM actually did try to help people with letters, with mail correspondence.
Of course, of course.
And
You're going to try to teach through any available
exactly.
means. We need to be flexible teachers. We need to understand what the AT principles are, and we need to be able to teach them through a broad spectrum of media and pedagogy.
I could not agree more.
So
Let's
I encourage everyone to experiment. You might want to start with students you're already working on with hands-on
mhm.
lessons.
Mhm.
You might want to experiment with family or friends, but experiment. And as opposed to saying that it's not possible or it loses what is the essence of Alexander Technique, I think the essence of Alexander Technique is very deep and is more important now than ever,
Mhm.
with the dangers of losing our sense of space, or spatial and temporal sensibilities, due to the two-dimensional nature of technology. We don't want to be left out of that conversation.
I think that is the perfect place to end our conversation. Excuse me. My guest has been Monica Gross, an Alexander Technique teacher in Asheville, North Carolina.
And I
If
should say I
you
also teach in New York. I go back and forth
and
between.
New York City. So if you are in either of those general areas, give her a call. We'll put a link to her website by the interview. If you're anywhere else in the world and there's no teacher available in your area, she uses Skype, and you can contact her through her website and I assume set up an introductory Skype session with her.
That's right. And the website is Form Fitness Function, one word, formfitnessfunction.com.
Yep, and I'll put a link to that by the interview also. So Monica, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks, Robert. This was great fun. I look forward to more conversations.